Hi, I'm Nancy Mahoney, and I'm a quilt designer, author, and teacher. To find out more about me, visit my website. Today we're working on the Aviary Block of the Month designed by Keith Phillips of Quilt Fusion, and this project features beautiful Hoffman batiks. In this lesson, we'll be making Block 1. Now in Block 1, I want to refer back to assembling the applique to prepare your backgrounds as well as to assemble your fusing guide. I've already assembled my fusing guide and I've pinned it to my background, or I've pinned my background to my fusing guide actually. And I'm going to show you how to do one portion of this block, the top portion of it. In the first episode, I explained to you how your pieces, how to locate your pieces and how to label all of them, and that you're going to need to cut them apart. So remember, there's just these little places where they're joined, and they're joined so that your pieces actually will stay together so that you can label them. And just go in, once you've got your numbers on, there's a letter and a number for each piece, just go in and use your scissors and just clip those little places, and that will release the applique. Don't try and pull them apart because it will tear the fabric and you'll get a thread running on the fabric. So just be sure and clip them apart carefully. For this block, the background piece is 44 inches long, so I marked the top and bottom of my fusible guide 1/4 inch beyond the solid line, because the solid line is the stitching line. So we need to go 1/4 inch beyond that. I also already fused a few pieces to my background. And you're going to start with your A piece. In this case, the A piece is a square. The B piece is the moon. This stem, which comes in two pieces, is C1 and C2. We then have D1 and D2 for the other long stem piece, and E goes down in this corner. And as you can see, I'm just building alphabetically. You can prepare the stems on a piece of parchment paper, but I found it was just as easy to go ahead and fuse them on my background. Now I'm going to show you the next group of pieces, which is F. So I'm just going to set this aside for a minute. We'll come back to it. And I've placed my tracing guide on the light box. It's really helpful to use a light box. It's not critical for you to have one, but you're going to find it's a lot easier if you do. If you don't have a light box, you can make one by placing a piece of glass. Take a leaf out of your dining room table, place a piece of glass over where the leaf would go and put a lamp underneath it. Or you can use a clear plastic tin that you can put a small lamp inside and put then a piece of glass or a piece of plexiglass on top of that. You could use a window. I do think that that would be rather difficult to do it that way and probably would not be your first choice. So I really do recommend either making a light box or buying one. And it's not something you use all the time, but I find it handy to have one, whenever I need one. So I'm just going to pin my parchment paper to my fusing guide. Make sure that when you're using parchment paper, you always select a non-stick parchment paper. Not all parchment paper is created equal, and so you want to make sure there's some kind of finish on it that is a non-stick. And if you're not familiar with parchment paper, it's available in your grocery store, in the baking department in your grocery store, where you find those other kinds of products, foil and other kinds of wraps and bags. So I'm going to assemble piece F. This F is a leaf. So I have pinned my placement guide or fusing guide to my parchment paper because I don't want my parchment paper to slip around. And I've pre-cut all my pieces. I've snipped them all out. They're pre-cut, but I've snipped them so that they're individual pieces. They've been labeled before I did that. And I stacked them so that I have F1 on top. We've already fused E, so F is our next one. If you have a big area where you're working, you can just lay them out in numerical order. But because of our little bit confined space here, I just stacked one on top of the next one. I'm just going to wiggle the paper a little bit, fold it over so that it releases from the fabric. And kind of pay attention. It's hard to see the fusible when you take the paper off. So if you're paying attention when you take it off, you'll know that you need to flip this piece over. This is F1 right here, and I'm just going to place that, line up the pieces, line up the shape And with my iron, I'm just going to give it a little rub of the hot iron just to kind of hold it in place. I don't really want to fuse it yet. I just want to hold it in place. Then I have F2, and I'm going to release that piece. Now all of the fusibles, and I have to kind of look for where F2 goes. I'm going to line it up. All of the fusible shapes are reversed because they are applique, fusible applique. So you notice I'm just putting my iron there a couple places. So when you pick it up, it's going to be reversed of where it is on the fusible guide. Once you peel off the paper and flip it over, then it's going to match the shape on the fusing guide. Remember that the guide is just that, it's a guide. So if it shifts a little bit, don't worry, it's just a guide. It doesn't have to match it exactly. And peel that off. Now this piece needs to go under a stem that goes right here. So I'm just getting that lined up. That was 4. 5 comes next. Peeling off the paper. This part goes fairly quickly. And you notice I'm not putting the whole iron down, just enough to hold pieces in place. And now 6 is a stem. So once I get that paper off of that, I'm going to line it up. And you have to find a good registration place here to get it lined up. Get all that in place. And then just fuse it. And whenever something goes over the top of it, you kind of lose the underneath layer. And then 7 goes on top of the stem up here at the top. It's going to go, what I'm looking at is the stem part here, because that's just about all I can see of it. So I'll fuse that a little bit. And then I'll move it over here to the pressing surface itself so that I can fuse the whole thing and give everything a nice press and get it in place. Next comes the petal. Petals, this flower right here. And this starts with G1. So that's where a light box comes in really handy, is that allows you to be able to see where your letters, what your numbers are and where these places go. And this little petal, the end of the petal is G2, and that's going to go on top of G1. So just give that in place. And then I have to get G2 on there. It shifted a little bit, but that's all right. And again, if you can't really see it below, it's not going to be a big deal because it's a guide. So I would go ahead and build all of G2, or G, my G petal, and to look for where 3 goes. And sometimes you're going to have to peel up a piece. Here's where G goes. Put that piece, and you'll notice now this one's going to go on top of that leaf. Give it a press. We're going to put G4 on there. You can always peel it up if you can't see clearly where something goes. G5, it's right here. Always just pay attention to how the shapes are laid out. And 6 gets its little end. These little pieces are really, sometimes it's hard to tell which side has the fusible on, so that's when you really want to pay attention as you're picking it up, that you're taking which side the fusible is coming off of. And I would just continue to build this leaf, here's, or this flower, here's 7. So, and 8's gonna, I'm just going to, without fusing, I'm just going to put them in place because I want to get these all in place so that I can move them over to my background. And once I get those in place, I'm just going to put each little end on there. And I could do several. Give them a little press. You just don't want them shifting as you're moving around. And you can see how I've built this whole flower here on the parchment paper. Now, if you've done just what I did and peeled it off and didn't pay attention, if you hold it up to light, sometimes you can see the fusible web. You really want to identify where the webbing is before you put it down. Now, this one I didn't get down quite far enough, so I'm just going to do a little bit of an adjustment there and make sure that I've got the ends of everything covered. You really want to make sure that the ends of all the pieces are covered. And I've got one little guy to go here on the end of this flower, like so. Now, again, I'm going to move it over to the pressing surface and give this a good press. Just make sure I've got everything in place, except I've lost, oh, there it is. There's my little one that should go right there. And once I know I've got it all, everything's adhered together, what I'm doing is I'm fusing the different layers together. I'm not necessarily fusing them to the parchment paper, so I don't care that this one's loose. But I'm going to peel this all off of my parchment paper so it comes off as one whole piece. Then I'm going to move that out of the way, and that's why I really like working with two pieces of fusing guides, because now I can take this fusing guide, place it on my light table with my background, and I can align where this goes at the top of this block. Now, it may have shifted a little bit, and that's really okay. Just make sure that you get everything turned going in the correct direction and more or less lined up. But my fusing guide, always remember, it's a guide. And so don't stress yourself about, oh, not everything lines up perfectly, because it may not. And once you take it off the guide, you're never going to notice whether it's lined up differently than it shows on the guide. Just make sure it's flat. So once it's flat, I'll put it on the ironing surface or pressing surface. And now I'm going to give everything just a really good press so that I make sure that all my fusibles adhere to my background. And once I've done that, I can't reposition them. So you want to make sure that before you press, that it's where you want it to be. And so that completes the top part of this block. So join me next time and I'll be making block 2. This episode of Aviary Block of the Month has been brought to you by Hoffman Fabrics, made to inspire since 1924, and Quilt Fusion, design, create, and collaborate.